The dust-covered stagecoach rolled into Concordia, Kansas on a sweltering afternoon in August 1878, carrying within it a young woman whose eyes held the terror of someone who had just realized she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Quinlan Jameson stood on the wooden walkway outside the general store, his worn hat pulled low against the brutal sun, watching the coach lurch to a stop in front of the small depot. His heart hammered against his ribs with an intensity that made his hands shake. 3 months ago, loneliness had driven him to respond to an advertisement in a Kansas City newspaper, and now his mail-order bride had arrived. The arrangement had been made through letters translated by a broker, a common enough practice when languages differed. The woman was Hungarian, the broker had explained, from a village near Budapest. Her name was Borbala Horvath, and she was 21 years old, only 2 years younger than Quinlan himself. He had sent money for her passage across the Atlantic, and then the long train journey west. He had prepared his small ranch house as best he could, adding curtains his mother had sewn before she passed, scrubbing every surface until his knuckles bled. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of it. The stage driver climbed down and opened the door. A small gloved hand emerged first, trembling visibly even from where Quinlan stood. Then she stepped down, and he forgot how to breathe. Borbala was petite, barely reaching his shoulder, with thick dark hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was European in style, well made but showing the wear of a long journey. Her face was pale despite the heat, and her dark eyes darted around the unfamiliar town with barely concealed panic. She clutched a worn carpetbag in both hands as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had turned liquid beneath her feet. Quinlan forced his legs to move, crossing the dusty street with long strides. As he approached, her eyes fixed on him, and he saw her swallow hard. He removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his sunburned face, his calloused hands, the dust that seemed permanently ground into his skin. "Miss Horvath," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. She stared at him blankly. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she spoke, a rapid stream of words in a language that sounded like music and stones grinding together all at once. Her voice rose at the end, making it a question, but Quinlan understood nothing. His stomach dropped. The broker had assured him she spoke some English. That had been part of the arrangement. But as Borbala continued speaking, gesturing now with one hand while the other gripped her bag, it became painfully clear that she spoke not a single word of his language. "I'm Quinlan," he tried, pointing to himself. "Quinlan Jameson. You're—" he faltered. Husband seemed too presumptuous given they had just met. "I sent for you." She spoke again, slower this time, and he caught what might have been his name in the tumble of foreign syllables. She pointed at him questioningly, and he nodded. "Yes, Quinlan, that's me." He pointed at her. "Borbala." Her face flooded with relief at the recognition of her own name, and she nodded vigorously. "Ijan," she said, then caught herself and tried something else. She pointed at herself and said very carefully, "Borbala." The stage driver had unloaded a trunk, considerably battered from its journey. "This all?" he asked Quinlan. "Appears to be." Quinlan paid the man and hefted the trunk onto his shoulder. It was heavier than expected, and he wondered what she had brought from her old life. He gestured toward his wagon, which waited in the shade near the livery stable. Borbala followed, her steps small and uncertain on the unfamiliar ground. Concordia was not a large town, maybe 300 souls on a good day, but it had the essentials. A general store, a blacksmith, a church, a saloon, and a scattering of businesses that served the surrounding ranches and farms. To someone from a Hungarian village, It must have looked impossibly foreign. Quinlan loaded her trunk into the wagon bed and then turned to help her up onto the seat. She recoiled from his touch, and he immediately pulled back, his face heating. "Sorry," he muttered, knowing she would not understand the word but hoping his tone conveyed the meaning. He gestured to the wagon seat, then made a climbing motion. She understood this and managed to pull herself up, though her dress made the process awkward. Quinlan climbed up beside her, careful to leave space between them. He clicked his tongue to the horses, and they started the journey to his ranch, 5 miles outside of town. The silence was suffocating. Quinlan tried several times to speak, commenting on the landscape, the weather, the town they were leaving behind. Each time, Borbala would turn to look at him with those dark, frightened eyes, and he would trail off, defeated by the wall of incomprehension between them. His ranch was modest. A wooden house with 2 bedrooms, a barn for the horses, a chicken coop, and corrals for his small herd of cattle. He had 20 head, enough to make a living but not enough to be considered prosperous. The land stretched out in gentle rolling hills, golden with late summer grass. A creek ran through the eastern edge of his property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided precious shade. When they arrived, Borbala climbed down before he could offer assistance. She stood in the yard, looking at the house with an expression he could not read. Was it disappointment? Fear? Simple exhaustion. He carried her trunk inside and set it in the smaller bedroom, the one he had prepared for her. The bed was made with clean sheets, and wildflowers sat in a jar on the windowsill, already wilting in the heat. He had wanted it to look welcoming, but now it just seemed pathetic. When he emerged, she was standing in the main room, which served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. Her fingers traced the edge of his rough-hewn table. She turned to him and spoke a single word, a question by her tone. He spread his hands helplessly. "I don't understand." Her face crumpled, and for a horrible moment he thought she might cry. But she pulled herself together, straightening her shoulders. She pointed at the stove, then at herself, then made a cooking motion. "Oh, you want to cook? Are you hungry?" He mimed eating. She nodded emphatically. "Ijan." He showed her where he kept his meager supplies. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, a few vegetables from his struggling garden. She examined everything with the careful attention of someone taking inventory of a disaster. When she opened the flour sack and found it inhabited by weevils, she made a sound of disgust that needed no translation. Quinlan felt his face burn with shame. He did his best, but housekeeping was not a skill he had ever mastered. He had been surviving more than living. Borbala rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She sifted the flour, fed the chickens she found scratching around the yard, gathered eggs, and somehow conjured a meal from ingredients he had been staring at helplessly for weeks. She did not speak except to ask questions in Hungarian, which he answered in English, and somehow through gestures and context, they managed a crude communication. When she set the food on the table, it was simple but transformed from anything he had made himself. The eggs were cooked properly, the bread was actually edible, and she had found wild herbs growing near the creek to season everything. They ate in silence, painful and complete. Quinlan tried to think of something, anything, to bridge the chasm between them. Finally, he pointed at the bread and said, "Bread." She looked at him questioningly. He repeated it, pointing more emphatically. "Bread, this is bread." Understanding dawned in her eyes. She pointed at it and said something in Hungarian. "Bread," he said again. "Bread," she attempted, the word awkward in her mouth. "Bread. Close enough." He smiled, and she offered a tiny, uncertain smile in return. It was a beginning. Over the next weeks they developed a routine born of necessity. Quinlan would wake before dawn to tend the cattle and horses. Borbala would rise shortly after to manage the household. She proved to be a tireless worker, attacking the neglected house with a determination that both impressed and shamed him. She scrubbed, mended, organized, and transformed his bachelor dwelling into something that resembled a home. They communicated through gestures, drawings, and an ever-growing vocabulary of shared words. Each meal became a language lesson. Quinlan would point at items and name them in English. Borbala would repeat them, her pronunciation improving each time, and then she would offer the Hungarian word in return. "Water," he would say, holding up the pitcher. "Viz," she would respond, and he would try to wrap his tongue around the unfamiliar sound. He learned that yes was "igen" and no was "nem." Thank you was "kursernerm," which he could barely pronounce and which made her laugh when he tried. It was the first time he heard her laugh, a bright sound that filled the lonely house with something like joy. But beneath the daily routines and small moments of connection, tension simmered. They were strangers bound by a contract, living in close quarters, unable to truly communicate. Quinlan found himself watching her when she did not notice, admiring the efficient grace of her movements, the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair when she sat mending his shirts in the evening. He wanted to tell her she was beautiful, that he was grateful she had come, that he hoped she might someday be happy here. But the words that could express such things lay beyond his limited Hungarian vocabulary, and her English was still too fragile. For her part, Borbala remained guarded. She flinched if he moved too quickly, kept distance between them always, and her eyes held a sadness that deepened each evening. He wondered what she had left behind, what she had hoped to find here, and how crushing her disappointment must be. The legal marriage had been arranged to take place after her arrival, allowing them to meet first. A practical consideration, though it felt increasingly awkward as days stretched into weeks. Reverend Morse came out from town to perform a brief ceremony. Borbala wore the same dress she had arrived in, freshly cleaned. She spoke her vows in Hungarian, he in English, and the reverend pronounced them married with an uncomfortable awareness that neither party had understood what the other promised. That night, Quinlan laid blankets on the floor of the main room and slept there, leaving Borbala the bedroom he had been using. He could not imagine forcing himself on someone who looked at him with such uncertainty. Whatever the law said, whatever the contract stipulated, she deserved the choice. In the morning, he found her sitting at the table, her face blotchy from crying. She looked up when he entered, quickly wiping her eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked, though he knew the question was useless. She spoke rapidly in Hungarian, her voice thick with emotion. He caught a few words he had learned. Home, mother, afraid. His heart twisted. He sat down across from her, careful to keep the table between them. "I know you're scared," he said quietly. "I know you miss your home. I'm sorry. I'm sorry this isn't what you expected. I'm sorry I can't even tell you that properly." She watched him as he spoke, and though she could not understand the words, something in his tone seemed to reach her. She took a shaky breath and wiped her eyes again. Then she stood and went to the stove to make coffee, her way of saying the moment was over and life continued. Quinlan realized that morning that gestures alone were not enough. If they were to build any kind of life together, he needed to truly learn her language, and she needed to learn his. They needed words for things beyond bread and water. They needed words for feelings, for hopes, for the delicate business of two people learning to live as one. He rode into town that afternoon and went to see Mrs. Eliza Porter, the schoolteacher. She was a formidable woman in her 50s who had taught most of Concordia's children to read and cipher. "I need books," he told her, "on languages. Hungarian if you can find it, but anything about learning foreign tongues. Mrs. Porter raised an eyebrow. I heard your bride arrived. Not speaking English, is she? Not a word. And you are not speaking Hungarian, I imagine. No, madam. She studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes assessing. There is a catalog from a bookseller in Kansas City. I can send for some materials, but it will take time. Several weeks, perhaps. Anything would help. In the meantime, Mr. Jameson, might I suggest you visit Father Carroll at the Catholic Church in Salina. He is from Poland, speaks several languages including Hungarian. He might be willing to help. Salina was a full day's ride north, but Quinlan nodded. Thank you. I'll go next week. When he returned home, Borbala had cleaned the barn and was attempting to repair a broken hinge on the chicken coop. She had found his tools and was working with fierce concentration, though the hammer looked oversized in her small hands. He came up beside her and gently took the hammer. Let me, he said, gesturing. She stepped back and he made the repair. When he finished, she said, Kurser Nurm. You're welcome, he replied. She repeated it carefully. You, welcome, welcome, you're welcome, you welcome. She smiled slightly, and he felt absurdly proud. The next week he made the journey to Salina. Father Carroll was a small man with wire-rimmed spectacles and hands stained with ink. He listened to Quinlan's situation with patient interest. This is not uncommon, the priest said in accented but clear English. Many immigrants arrive speaking nothing of English. It is difficult, yes, but not impossible. You wish to learn Hungarian? I wish to speak with my wife, Quinlan said. Really speak with her. She's trying to learn English, but I figure if I meet her halfway it might help, and maybe she'd feel less alone. Father Carroll smiled. This is a good instinct. Love requires communication, and communication requires effort. He went to a shelf and pulled down several worn books. These are primers, basics. I can also write for you some common phrases. But Mr. Jameson, the best teacher is your wife herself. Practice with her daily. It will bring you closer. The priest spent the afternoon teaching Quinlan basic Hungarian pronunciation, the strange sounds and combinations of letters. It was harder than Quinlan had anticipated. His mouth struggled to form sounds it had never made. But he persisted, writing everything down phonetically, practicing until his tongue ached. When he finally returned home the following evening, it was full dark. Borbala met him at the door, her face tight with worry. She had clearly been frightened by his absence. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I should have told you I'd be gone. I went to. He paused, then tried in careful Hungarian, Sajnalem. Her eyes widened. You speak, Basale, he attempted. Only a little, very little. I went to Salina to see a priest who speaks Hungarian, to learn so I can talk to you. He was not sure how much she understood, but her expression shifted from worry to something else entirely. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they seemed different from the tears of homesickness he had seen before. She stepped closer to him than she had ever voluntarily come and placed her hand on his arm. The touch was light, tentative, but it was deliberate. She spoke in Hungarian slowly, and he caught some of it. Thank you, and good and kind. That night, they sat at the table with the materials Father Carroll had provided. Quinlan tried to explain what he was attempting, using his broken Hungarian and gestures. Borbala understood and immediately took over, becoming his teacher. She pointed at the Hungarian words in the primer and pronounced them clearly, making him repeat until he got them right. When he succeeded, she would smile, and he found himself working harder just to earn those smiles. In turn, he taught her more English. They moved beyond nouns into verbs, trying to describe actions and feelings. It was slow, frustrating work. They stumbled over words, misunderstood each other, and sometimes ended in confused silence. but gradually, carefully, they built a bridge of words between them. One evening in October, when the weather had turned cool and the leaves on the cottonwoods had gone gold, Borbala was cooking dinner. Quinlan was attempting to read a letter from Father Carol written in simple Hungarian. It was describing a story from the Bible, the Good Samaritan, and Quinlan was working through it with painful slowness. "Quinlan," Borbala said. He looked up. She was holding a wooden spoon, looking uncertain. "Why?" she asked in English, then switched to Hungarian. "Miért tanulsz magyarul?" He understood the question. Why are you learning Hungarian? He could have answered in English, letting her parse it out, but instead he tried in Hungarian, pulling together everything he had learned. "Because you are here. Because we are married. Because I want to know you. Because you deserve someone who tries." His pronunciation was terrible, his grammar probably worse, but he got through it. Borbala stood very still, the spoon forgotten in her hand. Then she set it down carefully and walked over to him. She stood beside his chair, looking down at him with an expression he had never seen before. "Tijo Emberveji," she said softly. "You are good man." Before he could respond, she leaned down and kissed his forehead, a feather-light touch that seared through him like lightning. Then she returned to the stove as if nothing monumental had happened, leaving Quinlan sitting motionless, his heart thundering in his chest. Things shifted after that night. The distance between them began to close. Borbala started sitting closer at the table during their lessons. She laughed more often, and the sadness in her eyes began to lift. When they worked together on the ranch chores, they developed a rhythm, an unspoken coordination that made the work easier. Winter came hard that year. In late November, a blizzard rolled down from the north, burying Concordia under 2 feet of snow. Quinlan and Borbala were trapped in the house for 3 days, keeping the fire burning and rationing their supplies. On the second night, with wind howling around the eaves and snow piling against the windows, they sat close to the fire. Quinlan was reading aloud from a book in Hungarian that Father Carol had loaned him, struggling through the words. Borbala listened, occasionally correcting his pronunciation. When he finished the passage, she said in English, which had improved remarkably, "In Hungary, my village, we have snow like this. I remember being child, playing with brother in snow." It was the most she had volunteered about her past. Quinlan seized the opportunity. "Tell me about your family." She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Then she began to speak, mixing Hungarian and English, telling him about her village near Lake Balaton, her parents who had both died of fever when she was 17, her younger brother who had gone to Budapest to find work. She had been living with an aunt, but the aunt was old and poor. When the opportunity came to travel to America as a mail-order bride, it had seemed like her only option for a future. "I was afraid," she said quietly, "but more afraid to stay." Quinlan understood that kind of fear, the desperation that drove people to risk everything on the unknown. "I'm glad you came," he said in Hungarian. "Even though it has been hard, I am also glad," she replied in English, glancing at him. "You are different than I fear." "What did you fear?" "That you would be cruel, or old, or—" She searched for words, "not care. Many men, they want woman for work only, not see person." "I see you," Quinlan said. "I see that you are brave and strong and kind. I see that you laugh at my terrible Hungarian. I see that you made a home out of my house. I see you, Borbala." She turned to look at him fully, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I see you too, Quinlan. I see you try every day. I see you gentle with horses. I see you learn my language because you know I am lonely. I see you sleep on floor for months so I feel safe." He had not realized she knew about that. "You deserve to feel safe." "I feel safe now," she said quietly. "With you." The wind rattled the windows and the fire crackled, and between them something fundamental shifted. Borbala reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and warm in his. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, not needing to, as the storm raged outside and warmth grew inside. That night, after they banked the fire, Borbala stopped him before he could lay out his blankets on the floor. She spoke in Hungarian, and though his understanding was not perfect, he caught the meaning. She did not want him to sleep on the floor anymore. His pulse quickened. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Husband and wife," she said in careful English. "We are married. I want." She struggled for words, then said something in Hungarian that he did not quite catch. "I do not understand," he admitted. She came closer, close enough that he could see the flutter of her pulse at her throat. She reached up and cupped his face in both hands. "I want," she said again, and then she kissed him. It was nothing like the chaste kiss she had given his forehead weeks before. This was a real kiss, tentative at first but deepening as he responded. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled up at him. "Understand now?" she asked. "Yes," he managed. "I understand." Winter passed in a cocoon of growing intimacy. Trapped together by snow and cold, Quinlan and Borbala learned each other in ways that went beyond language. They learned the rhythms of each other's moods, the small gestures that communicated more than words. They made love and learned that passion needed no translation. They talked for hours, their mixed languages becoming more fluid as understanding grew. By the time spring arrived in 1879, Borbala was speaking English with increasing confidence, and Quinlan could hold entire conversations in Hungarian. They still stumbled sometimes, still searched for words, but the frustration had been replaced by affection. Their mistakes became private jokes. Their misunderstandings led to laughter rather than confusion. In April, Borbala realized she was pregnant. She told him in Hungarian first, the words tumbling out in excitement, and then repeated it in English when she saw his blank expression. "A baby," he said. "We are having a baby." "Yes." She threw her arms around his neck. "Are you happy?" He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "Happy?" "Borbala, I am more than happy. I am." He searched for the right word in Hungarian. "Bulldog, I am bulldog." "Bulldog," she agreed, kissing him. "Very bulldog." They made plans, prepared the smaller bedroom for the nursery, and told their neighbors. The women of Concordia, who had been curious about the foreign bride, began to visit more often, bringing gifts and advice. Borbala's English improved rapidly with more people to practice with, and she began to make friends. Mrs. Porter, the schoolteacher, became a frequent visitor. "I must say, Mr. Jameson, I am impressed," she told Quinlan one afternoon while Borbala was showing off her garden to the other ladies. "Most men would not have put in the effort you did. Most would have expected their wife to simply adapt." "She did adapt," Quinlan said. "I just figured it would be easier if she did not have to do it alone." That, young man, is the definition of a good marriage. In November, when the cottonwoods were bare and the first snow was threatening, Borbala went into labor. The midwife came from town, and Quinlan paced outside the bedroom door for what felt like an eternity. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Jameson. Both mother and baby are healthy." Quinlan entered the room to find Borbala propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Our son," she whispered in English. "Our Toby." They had chosen the name together, something that worked in both languages. Quinlan sat on the edge of the bed and carefully took his son into his arms. The baby was impossibly small, red-faced and perfect. "Hello, Toby," he said softly. Then in Hungarian, "Shia, Toby." Borbala laughed through her tears. "He is beautiful, yes, beautiful," Quinlan agreed. Like his mother, life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and more wonderful than Quinlan had imagined possible. Borbala sang Hungarian lullabies while rocking Toby to sleep. Quinlan told him stories in English. They spoke to him in both languages, determined that their son would grow up fluent in both his parents' tongues. As Toby grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Quinlan expanded his herd, and Borbala's garden became legendary in Concordia. She sold vegetables and preserves at the general store, earning her own money and pride in her work. She taught Hungarian phrases to anyone who wanted to learn, and several other immigrant families in the area sought her out, grateful to find someone who understood the challenges of adapting to a new land. One evening in the summer of 1881, when Toby was nearly 2 and running around the yard chasing chickens, Quinlan and Borbala sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments at the end of the day. "You ever regret it?" Quinlan asked. "Coming here?" Borbala was quiet for a moment, considering. "At first, yes," she admitted. "I was so afraid, so alone, I thought I had made terrible mistake. But now," she smiled and took his hand. "Now I cannot imagine different life. This is my home. You are my home." "I need to tell you something," Quinlan said. "I have been practicing it for weeks, trying to get it right." She turned to look at him curiously. "What is it?" He took a deep breath and spoke in Hungarian, his pronunciation much improved from his early attempts. "Sheretlek Borbala. Mindig sheretni foglak. T vagi a shivam, a lelkum, as a ledum itelmi." He had been practicing with Father Carol on their occasional visits to Salina, perfecting the words he wanted to say. "I love you, Borbala. I will always love you. You are my heart, my soul, the meaning of my life." Borbala's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Your Hungarian is getting too good," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Soon I have no excuse for my bad English." "Your English is perfect," he said, pulling her close. "And I love you. In any language, I love you." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "In English, in Hungarian, in every way there is. Sheretlek Quinlan." They sat together as the sun painted the Kansas sky in shades of gold and crimson, their son's laughter floating up from the yard, the life they had built together surrounding them in the gathering dusk. Years passed in the rhythm of ranch life. Toby grew into a bright, energetic boy who switched between English and Hungarian without thinking, sometimes mixing them in the same sentence. In 1883, Borbala gave birth to twin daughters, Clara and Anna, who inherited their mother's dark eyes and their father's stubborn chin. The house that had once been too quiet for one lonely cowboy now rang with the chaos of 3 small children. Quinlan expanded the ranch, hiring help during the busiest seasons. Borbala became a pillar of the Concordia community, her initial status as a foreign oddity long forgotten. She organized social events, helped new immigrants adapt, and even taught Hungarian folk dances to the children at Mrs. Porter's school. Father Carol visited several times a year, always welcome. He delighted in seeing the family he had helped create through his patient language lessons. "You have done well," he told Quinlan during a visit in 1885. "Not just with the ranch, but with building a true partnership. Many marriages begin with less and achieve less." "I learned from you," Quinlan said. "You taught me that making an effort matters more than being perfect." "Actually, I think your wife taught you that," Father Carol replied with a smile. "I merely provided vocabulary." The ranch continued to grow. By 1887, Quinlan had 50 head of cattle and was considering buying adjacent land. The children were thriving. Toby, at nearly 8, was already helping with ranch chores. The twins, at 4, were a whirlwind of energy and mischief. One autumn evening, after the children were in bed, Quinlan found Borbala in the kitchen kneading bread dough. She did this when she was thinking, finding peace in the rhythmic work. "What is on your mind?" he asked in Hungarian. They still spoke both languages at home, switching between them naturally. "My brother wrote," she said, "from Budapest. He wants to visit to meet you and the children." "That is wonderful news. Why do you look worried?" She stopped kneading and turned to face him, flour dusting her hands and forearms. "Because I realize how much time has passed. 9 years since I left Hungary. Andras was 18 then, just a boy. Now he is married, has children of his own. I have missed so much of his life." Quinlan crossed to her and took her floury hands in his. "Then we will bring him here, let him stay as long as he wants. The children should know their uncle. You would do that, the expense of the journey. Borbala, we can afford it, and family matters. You gave up everything to come here. The least we can do is help your family visit." She kissed him, leaving a smudge of flour on his cheek. "Have I told you today that I love you? Not for at least an hour. I was starting to worry." She laughed and swatted him with her dough-covered hand, leaving a handprint on his shirt. Impossible man. Andras arrived the following spring with his wife Kata and their young daughter. The reunion between brother and sister was emotional and loud and full of rapid Hungarian that left Quinlan struggling to follow. But the joy was universal and needed no translation. Andras was amazed by the ranch, by the vast Kansas plains so different from the Hungarian countryside he knew. "You have built something impressive here," he told Quinlan through Borbala's translation, though his English was improving daily. "My sister wrote about you, but I did not fully understand. You are good man, good husband." "Your sister makes it easy," Quinlan replied. The visit lasted 3 months, a time of family and celebration. Toby and the twins were fascinated by their Hungarian cousins, and the house rang with children speaking a mixture of English and Hungarian. When Andras and his family finally left to return to Hungary, there were tears but also promises to write, to stay connected. "Thank you," Borbala said to Quinlan as they watched the wagon disappear toward town and the train station. "For this, for everything." "You never have to thank me for loving you," he said. Life continued its forward motion. Toby grew tall and strong, eventually taking over more of the ranch work. The twins became inseparable, finishing each other's sentences in whichever language came first. In 1890, Borbala gave birth to another son, Michael, a surprise baby who arrived when she was 33 and Quinlan was 35. 4 children, Quinlan said, holding his newest son in the same bedroom where Toby had been born 11 years earlier. "We are officially outnumbered." "We have been outnumbered since the twins arrived," Borbala pointed out. "Now we are just very outnumbered." The ranch prospered into the 1890s. Quinlan bought the adjacent property, doubling his land. He hired permanent help, young men from town who were learning the ranching business. Toby, now a teenager, showed every sign of wanting to take over the ranch someday. In 1895, on a warm August evening 17 years after Borbala had arrived on that dusty stagecoach, Quinlan suggested they take a rare evening alone. The older children could watch Michael, and they could ride out to the creek like they used to do before the chaos of family life had consumed them. They rode in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from years of deep companionship. At the creek, they dismounted and sat beneath the cottonwoods, listening to the water and the evening birds. 17 years, Borbala said. "Can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like you have always been here." "I have a confession," she said. "That first month, maybe even first year, I wrote letters to Andras saying I had made terrible mistake. I never sent them, but I wrote them. I know you were unhappy. Not unhappy exactly, just lost. Everything was strange and I could not talk to anyone, could not explain what I was feeling. I felt like ghost, invisible. She paused. And then you started learning Hungarian. That helped. It changed everything. Because it meant you saw me, you cared about what I needed even when I could not ask for it. That is when I started to fall in love with you. Not all at once, but bit by bit. Every time you tried to say something in my language, every time you struggled through one of Father Carol's lessons. Quinlan was quiet for a moment, remembering those early days, his frustration and determination. I was terrified, he admitted. I thought you would leave, go back to Hungary if you could. I thought I had made your life worse instead of better. You made my life everything, Borbala said. She turned to face him fully. Do you remember that night during the first blizzard when I told you I felt safe with you? Yes. I need you to know that has never changed. In 17 years, you have never given me reason to feel anything but safe and loved and valued. You learned my language so you could say you loved me. But Quinlan, you showed me love every single day in 1,000 small ways. The language was just words. The love was in the actions. He pulled her close, this woman who had arrived as a frightened stranger and become his whole world. I would learn 100 languages for you. I know, she said. That is why I love you. They sat together as the light faded, the creek murmuring its endless song, the Kansas wind rustling through the cottonwood leaves. They had built something rare and precious out of silence and struggle, out of patience and determination. They had proven that love could be learned like a language, practiced and perfected over time, growing stronger with each passing day. As they rode back to the ranch, they could see the lamplight glowing in the windows of their home. They heard, before they even dismounted, the sound of their children's voices raised in some argument or game, the noise of family life in all its chaotic glory. Quinlan helped Borbala down from her horse, his hands on her waist, and she smiled up at him. Ready to face them, with you, always. They walked into the house together, greeted by the immediate demands of their children, pulled into the current of daily life. But throughout the evening, they exchanged glances, small smiles, the private communication of two people who understood each other completely. Later that night, after the children were finally all asleep, Quinlan found Borbala on the porch, looking up at the stars. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood beside her. I was thinking about that first night, she said. When I arrived and could not even tell you I was terrified. When you looked at me and I thought, what have I done? And now I think, look what I did. Look what we built. 4 beautiful children, a home, a life. From nothing, from 2 strangers who could not speak to each other, we made this. She gestured at the ranch spread out before them in the moonlight. It is miracle, yes. Yes, he agreed. It is a miracle. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arms around her. They stood like that for a long time, 2 souls who had found each other across an ocean and a language barrier, who had chosen each other again and again through the years. Sheretlek, he whispered in Hungarian. I love you too, she replied in English. And under the vast Kansas sky, on the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, those words in 2 languages meant exactly the same thing. Home. The years rolled on with the steady rhythm of seasons and the growing of children. Toby became a man, tall and capable, taking on more of the ranch responsibilities. In 1899, at 20, he married Sarah, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and Quinlan helped them build a house on the eastern section of the property. The ranch was large enough now to support 2 families, and having Toby stay filled Quinlan with pride and satisfaction. The twins, Clara and Anna, grew into young women as inseparable as they had been as children. Clara inherited her mother's practical nature and worked alongside Borbala in the garden and kitchen. Anna had a more adventurous spirit and often rode out with Quinlan to check on the cattle, sitting her horse as well as any man. Michael, the youngest, was a studious boy who loved books and showed more interest in school than ranching. Mrs. Porter, now elderly but still teaching, took special interest in his education and talked of him perhaps becoming a teacher himself someday. In 1902, Borbala and Quinlan became grandparents when Toby and Sarah welcomed a daughter. The baby was named Eliza after Mrs. Porter, and Borbala cried when she held her granddaughter for the first time. "We are old now," she said to Quinlan that night, though she was only 45 and he 47. "Speak for yourself," he replied. "I am in my prime." She laughed and swatted him. After 24 years of marriage, their teasing was as natural as breathing. The new century brought changes to Concordia. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more prosperity. The town grew from 300 souls to over 1,000. Automobiles began to appear, chugging down the dusty streets alongside horses and wagons. The world was speeding up, transforming in ways that sometimes made Quinlan feel like he had been left behind. But on his ranch, with his wife and children and now grandchild, the important things remained constant. The work still needed doing, the seasons still turned, and love still anchored everything. In 1905, Father Carroll died peacefully in his sleep in Salina. Quinlan and Borbala traveled north for the funeral, bringing all their children. As they stood at the graveside, Quinlan felt a profound sadness. This man had been the bridge between two worlds, the one who had given him the tools to reach his wife. "He would be happy to see us all here," Borbala said quietly, "to see what we built with what he taught us." "He was a good man," Quinlan agreed. At the wake afterward, they spoke with other families the priest had helped, other immigrants who had struggled with language and culture. There were Poles and Germans, Czechs and Russians, all with stories of Father Carroll's patient assistance. Quinlan realized that he and Borbala were not unique, that all around them were people who had made similar journeys, overcome similar obstacles. But what they had built felt unique to him. Perhaps every love story felt that way to those living it. Life continued its march forward. Clara married in 1907, wedding a banker's son from town. Anna followed in 1909, marrying a doctor who had recently moved to Concordia. Both stayed in the area, both visited frequently, filling the ranch house with grandchildren. Michael, true to his scholarly nature, won a place at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. The day they saw him off on the train, Borbala wept openly. "He will come back," Quinlan assured her. "I know, but it is end of something. The children are all grown. We are truly old now." "We are not old. We are seasoned." She smiled through her tears. "You always know what to say." "I learned from the best teacher," he said, and kissed her forehead. With the children grown and gone, the ranch house felt too large and too quiet. But Toby's family was nearby, and grandchildren visited constantly. Quinlan began to step back from the daily running of the ranch, letting Toby take over more of the decision-making. He was 52, and while still strong, he felt the years in his bones on cold mornings. Borbala turned her energy to her garden, which had become famous throughout the county. She also began writing down Hungarian recipes and family stories, creating a book for her children and grandchildren. She wanted them to know where they came from, to understand the heritage that flowed in their blood alongside their Kansas roots. In 1912, when Quinlan was 55 and Borbala was 53, they decided to take a trip back to Hungary. It had been 34 years since Borbala had left, and while they had corresponded with Andras and other family members, she had never returned. The journey was long and complicated, involving trains and then a steamship across the Atlantic. But they were doing it together, and that made all the difference. On the ship, standing at the rail and watching the endless ocean, Borbala said, "I made this journey alone last time. I was so frightened. Everything was unknown. And now I have you beside me, and I am not afraid of anything." Hungary was both familiar and foreign to Borbala. Her village had changed, modernized in ways that startled her. Many people she remembered were gone, dead or moved away. But Andras was there, older and grayer but still her brother, and his family welcomed them with traditional Hungarian hospitality. Quinlan's Hungarian, maintained over the years through speaking with Borbala and the children, served him well. He could converse easily, understand the rapid conversations around him. Andras's children, now grown with families of their own, were amazed that this American cowboy spoke their language. "Your wife trained you well," Andras joked. "She did," Quinlan agreed. "Best decision I ever made was to learn." They stayed for 2 months, reconnecting with family, visiting places from Borbala's childhood. They stood beside the graves of her parents, and Quinlan held her as she wept. They walked the shores of Lake Balaton, and Borbala told him stories of her youth. But when it was time to leave, she had no hesitation. "I am glad we came," she said as the train pulled away from the station, Andras and his family waving from the platform. "But I will be gladder to get home. To Kansas, to our ranch, to our family. That is home now. It has been for 34 years. They returned to Concordia in late 1912 to a boisterous welcome from their children and grandchildren. The ranch looked beautiful in the autumn light, the cottonwoods along the creek blazing gold. Walking into their house, seeing their things, sleeping in their own bed, Borbala sighed with contentment. "Now I know for certain," she said. "I am not Hungarian anymore, not really, and I am not fully American either. I am something new, something that is both and neither. I am myself, and that self belongs here." "You are mine," Quinlan said. "That is all that matters to me." "And you are mine," she replied. "In Hungarian, in English, in any language that has ever been spoken, you are mine and I am yours." The years between 1912 and 1920 were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper under Toby's management. More grandchildren arrived, a small army of them, and the house was rarely quiet. Quinlan and Borbala settled into the gentle rhythms of age, working less, enjoying more. They still rode out to the creek on summer evenings, though not as often as they once had. They still had their language lessons, teaching the grandchildren Hungarian words and phrases, wanting them to maintain that connection to their heritage. In 1920, Quinlan was 63 and beginning to feel his age more keenly. His joints ached, his hair was entirely gray, and he tired more easily. But he was content. He had his wife, his family, his land. He had built a life that mattered. One evening in September, sitting on the porch watching the sun set as they had done countless times before, Borbala said, "Do you remember what you said to me that night during the first blizzard, when you told me you saw me?" "I remember every word I have ever said to you," Quinlan replied. "Liar," she said affectionately. "But I remember that one, because that was when I started to hope, when I started to believe this could be more than just an arrangement, that it could be real. It was always real to me, I know, but I needed time to see it, and you gave me that time. You gave me patience and gentleness and effort. You learned my language so you could tell me you loved me. That was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "The greatest gift was you getting off that stagecoach," Quinlan said. "Scared and brave and beautiful." The greatest gift was you choosing to stay to build this life with me." She took his hand, her skin soft and wrinkled now, marked by decades of work and sun. "I would do it all again. Every moment. The fear, the loneliness, the struggle, because it all led here to this moment, to this life." "As would I," he said. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Kansas sky in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear the voices of their family, their legacy. They had taken a leap of faith across an ocean and a language barrier, and they had built something that would outlast them both. "I love you," Borbala said in Hungarian. "I love you," Quinlan replied in English. And in that moment, in those words spoken in two languages but meaning the same thing, was the whole story of their lives together. Two people who had started as strangers, separated by language and culture and everything that made human connection difficult. Two people who had chosen each other, learned each other, loved each other through patience and persistence and faith. The mail-order bride had arrived speaking no English. The cowboy had learned her language to say, "I love you." And in doing so, they had created not just a marriage but a miracle, a testament to the power of effort and understanding and love that transcended all barriers. As darkness fell over the Kansas plains, over the ranch they had built and the family they had raised, Quinlan and Borbala remained on the porch, hands clasped, hearts joined. They had been given a gift that 42 years earlier had seemed impossible, a true partnership, a genuine love, a life fully shared. And they had seized that gift with both hands and made it into something beautiful. Years continued to pass, gentle and sure as the turning seasons. Quinlan and Borbala grew older together, their hair silver, their faces lined with the map of their years. But their love remained constant, a foundation that had only grown stronger with time. In 1925, they celebrated their 47th wedding anniversary with a gathering of the entire family. The ranch house and yard overflowed with children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. Toby was now a man of 46 with grown children of his own. Clara and Anna, both in their 40s, presided over their own families. Even Michael, the scholar, had returned to Kansas with his wife and children, taking a position teaching at a college in Salina. At the party, Toby stood and raised a glass. "To my parents," he said, "who showed us all what love looks like. Who built something from nothing, who never gave up on each other, who taught us that effort and understanding matter more than anything else." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Quinlan felt his eyes sting with tears. Borbala squeezed his hand. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the family had gone home, a few of the older grandchildren approached them. These were teenagers and young adults now, the oldest of the next generation. "Grandma," one of them asked, "will you tell us again about when you first came here?" "About what it was like," Borbala smiled. She had told this story many times, but she never tired of it. "It was August 1878, she began. "I was 21 years old, and I had just traveled across an ocean to marry a man I had never met." She told them about the fear, the loneliness, the crushing isolation of not being able to communicate. Quinlan added his perspective, his memories of those early desperate days when he had thought they would never be able to truly reach each other. "But Grandpa learned Hungarian for you," one of the grandchildren said. "That is so romantic." "It was not romance at first," Quinlan said honestly. "It was necessity, it was desperation, but yes, it became romance, it became love, because we chose it every single day." "How do you stay in love for so long?" another grandchild asked. Borbala and Quinlan exchanged a look, a whole conversation passing between them in a glance. "You keep choosing each other," Borbala said. "You keep trying, you keep learning. Love is not just feeling, it is action. It is deciding every day that this person matters more than your pride or your comfort or your fear. And you learn their language, Quinlan added. Whatever that language is, maybe it is Hungarian, maybe it is learning to understand what they need when they cannot say it. Maybe it is just paying attention, really seeing them, but you learn their language and you speak it every single day. The grandchildren were quiet, absorbing this wisdom. Then one of them, a young woman of 18, said, "I hope I find what you have someday." "You will," Borbala assured her. "Maybe not the same way, but if you are brave and patient and willing to work for it, you will find your own version of this." In 1928, at the age of 71, Quinlan's health began to decline. His heart was weak, the doctor said. There was nothing to be done but rest and let nature take its course. Quinlan accepted this with the same calm practicality he had brought to everything in his life. Borbala refused to accept it. She cared for him fiercely, sat with him for hours, read to him in both English and Hungarian. She held his hand and told him stories of their life together, reminding him of every beautiful moment they had shared. "You cannot leave me yet," she told him one night. "We have not finished our story." "Borbala," he said gently, "our story is finished. It is complete. We have had 49 years together. We have 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. We have built a ranch and a legacy. Our story has a perfect ending." "No," she said stubbornly. "The ending is not yet. You have to stay." But they both knew the truth. His body was failing. The strong, capable man who had built a life from nothing was fading. On a warm evening in June 1928, with the windows open and the scent of Borbala's roses drifting in on the breeze, Quinlan asked his family to gather. They all came, filling the house. Toby with his lined face and steady presence, Clara and Anna who looked so much like their mother, Michael with his thoughtful eyes, and all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. "I want you to remember something," Quinlan told them, his voice weak but clear. "Love is a choice. Every day it is a choice. Your grandmother and I, we chose each other when we could not even speak to each other. We kept choosing each other every day after. That is what I want for all of you. Choose love, choose effort, choose understanding. It will not always be easy, but it will always be worth it." Borbala sat beside him, tears streaming down her face but making no sound. After everyone had said their goodbyes and left the room, it was just the two of them again, as it had been at the start. "I do not want to go," Quinlan whispered. "I know," Borbala said. "But you have given me everything. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me a language when I could not speak. You gave me love when I did not believe I deserved it. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You have done enough, my love. You can rest now." "Sheretlek," he said in Hungarian, his voice barely audible. "Sheretlek," she replied. "Always and forever. In this life and whatever comes after, you are mine and I am yours, and that will never change." He smiled, squeezed her hand one last time, and closed his eyes. He left peacefully in the house he had built, in the arms of the woman he had loved for 49 years. Borbala sat with him for a long time afterward, holding his hand, speaking to him in Hungarian, telling him everything she would miss, everything she was grateful for. When Toby finally came in and gently told her it was time, she nodded and allowed him to lead her away. The funeral was large. Quinlan Jameson had been a respected man in Concordia, and people came from all over the county to pay their respects. But for Borbala, it was a private grief, a loss so profound that words in any language seemed inadequate. In the days and weeks after, she moved through the house like a ghost. Everything reminded her of him. The chair where he had sat learning Hungarian from Father Carol's books. The porch where they had watched countless sunsets. the bedroom where they had shared 49 years of nights. Her children worried about her. But gradually, slowly, she began to emerge from the fog of grief. She realized that the best way to honor Quinlan was to continue the work they had started together. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them Hungarian phrases, telling them stories of their grandfather, of the young cowboy who had learned a foreign language because he wanted to say, "I love you," properly. She worked in her garden, the roses and vegetables that had been her pride for decades. She wrote more in her book of family history, making sure that future generations would know the story of how two strangers from different worlds had built a life together. In 1930, at the age of 71, Borbala stood in front of a crowd at the Concordia town hall. The town was celebrating its 60th anniversary, and she had been asked to speak as one of the oldest residents, someone who had been part of the town's history. She stood at the podium, her white hair pinned up, her dress simple but neat, and she spoke in English that still carried a trace of Hungarian accent even after 52 years in Kansas. "I came to this town in 1878, she began. "I was young and scared and could not speak a word of English. I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life. But I met a man, a good man, who taught me that love is not about speaking the same language at the start. It is about being willing to learn each other's language, to meet in the middle, to build a bridge between two worlds." She told them about Quinlan, about his patience and determination, about how he had ridden to Salina to learn Hungarian just so he could communicate with her. She told them about the life they had built, the family they had raised, the love that had sustained them through 49 years. "My husband is gone now," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "But what we built together remains. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. This ranch that started with 20 cattle and a dream. And the lesson we learned together. That love requires effort, that understanding requires work, that the greatest things in life are worth fighting for." When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. People stood and applauded, and Borbala felt something shift inside her. The grief would never fully leave, but she could carry it alongside the joy, the gratitude for what she had been given. She lived for 8 more years, vital and engaged until the end. She saw Michael become a respected professor, saw more great-grandchildren born, saw the ranch continue to thrive under Toby's management and then under his son's. She maintained her garden, her friendships, her connection to the community she had once feared would never accept her. On a quiet morning in April 1938, Borbala Jameson passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 81 years old. She was buried beside Quinlan in the Concordia cemetery, under a headstone that bore both of their names and, at her request, one line in Hungarian and one in English. Sheretlek/I love you. At her funeral, the church overflowed with people. 4 children, 14 grandchildren, 23 great-grandchildren, and 2 great-great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye. The service was bilingual, conducted in both English and Hungarian, honoring the woman who had lived between 2 languages, 2 cultures, 2 worlds. Toby, now 61 years old, stood to speak about his mother. "She taught us many things," he said. "She taught us how to work hard, how to cook Hungarian food, how to speak her language. But the most important thing she taught us was what she learned with our father, that love is a verb. It is something you do, not just something you feel." Every day for 49 years they chose each other, and even in the 10 years since his death, she continued to choose love. She chose to remember, to honor, to carry on what they built together. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch. The house had been expanded and updated over the years, but the bones of it remained the same. This was still the house Quinlan had prepared for his mail-order bride in 1878. This was still the home where they had raised their children, where they had built their life. As the sun set that evening, several of the grandchildren stood on the porch, watching the light fade over the Kansas plains. "Tell us the story again," one of the youngest great-grandchildren asked. "About how Grandma and Grandpa fell in love." So they told it, the story that had become family legend, about the mail-order bride who arrived speaking no English, about the cowboy who learned her language to say, "I love you," about patience and persistence and the power of choosing each other every single day. And as they told it, standing in the house those two people had made into a home, the story felt less like history and more like a promise. A promise that love could bridge any divide. That effort mattered. That understanding was possible. That two people, no matter how different, could build something beautiful if they were willing to work for it. The ranch continued under the management of Toby's son, and then his grandson. The family stayed close, maintained their traditions, taught the Hungarian language to each new generation. They kept Borbala's garden going, her roses blooming every summer. They preserved the books Quinlan had used to learn Hungarian, kept Borbala's recipe collection, maintained the family history she had so carefully documented. Decades passed. The world changed. The automobile gave way to faster cars, then to highways that connected Concordia to larger cities. The ranch modernized, adding new technology, new methods. But through it all, the story remained constant, the story of two people who should never have worked, who started with every obstacle imaginable, who built anyway, who chose love when love was just a word neither could say in the other's language, who learned together, grew together, loved together for nearly 50 years. And in that story was a truth that transcended time and place and circumstance. That love, real love, was worth every effort. That understanding could be learned. That bridges could be built between any two souls willing to meet in the middle. The mail-order bride had arrived speaking no English. The cowboy had learned her language to say, "I love you." And together, they had created something that lasted long after their voices fell silent. They had created a family, a home, a legacy. They had created proof that love, when chosen deliberately and maintained faithfully, could overcome anything. And that, in the end, was the greatest love story of all.